Hey guys, we are back updating the Power Rankings for Survivor 47 following episode 12, which was a pretty fun episode. I feel like there was a pretty interesting outcome, as well as an interesting ride leading up to the outcome, but we'll get to that soon enough. But we have 7 people to talk about, and so waste some more time. Let's go right into the video. So starting off at number 7, we have the latest boo from the season, and here we have Caroline. And obviously Caroline is the victim of this pretty massive blindside that happens across this episode. And I do think her actual downfall across this episode is pretty interesting to watch, even though I was kind of expecting it by the end of it. Where some of that was due to stuff that happened before the episode, where Gordon Holmes sent out a tweet saying that this was the best episode of the new era, and why else would he say that unless there was this pretty massive blindside or a pretty crazy tribal? But I think even beyond that, within the episode itself, there was plenty of setup to Caroline going home here, where she gets plenty of content early on talking about how her and Sue are pretty close, how they're this clear duo that's going to get to the end together, and that she's a strategist. You have her talking again later on about how she can see the $1 million in front of her and that she can see herself winning. And then right before Tribal, when she finds out that she is a potential target, she talks about how that's validation, that she is this big jury threat, and that she hopes that the jury will see that she's a worthy contender. And again, all of this just felt like it was leading up to her eventually being taken out here in this pretty massive move, and sure enough, that ended up being the case here. Now, if we're talking about Caroline in general, I feel like she played a pretty smooth game, all things considered, where while she wasn't necessarily a dominant player across the season, she was able to remain the majority for most of her run, and I feel like had she gotten towards the end, she would have been a pretty impressive contender to possibly win the game. And I think from an edger perspective, she was also a pretty interesting contender for a lot of the season. Now, I did have plenty of issues with her edit, where I feel like she was very much lacking in personal content for a lot of the season. I also felt like she was propping up other people for a lot of the season as well, over herself, which was an issue. And while there were plenty of pros to go along with her edit as well, like her connection to the themes of the season, and her being this consistent presence and someone who was getting unnecessary content, I felt like those knocks were big enough to where I never felt super comfortable having her very high, where even though there was one week where I had her at number 1, I felt like it was at a point where I was questioning Rachel more so than really feeling good about Caroline. So really at the end of the day, I feel like Caroline's an interesting figure from an edger perspective. And while she was never really towards the bottom of my rankings by any means, I feel like there was enough question marks that kind of left her hovering on the edge for a lot of it. But she's now out of the game to where she's here at number 7. And before we continue, I am once again partnering up with Russell Muscle TV to promote Idle Plays. Idle Plays is an online shop where you can purchase Survivor puzzles and practice them. That way you can potentially be the next challenge beast on Survivor 47 and beyond. In this season, we have creator lockers. These are special bundles handpicked by myself and other Survivor YouTubers, along with creator trading cards. If you purchase my puzzle, you can get your hands on the Labyrinth Ball puzzle, the Slide puzzle, and Spencer's puzzle from Survivor Cambodia. If you want to take home these puzzles and more, feel free to use my link in the description or use my affiliate code, Survivor Gumball, and start prepping now. And with that, we have 6 people left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how lucky I think they are to win the game based on their edit and current game position. And we're technically at the finale now, which is sort of weird to think about, where even though there are technically 2 episodes left, they're advertising this as a 2-part finale, where next week's episode is going to be a double elimination, which will lead into the proper finale being at the final 4, which is definitely a change of pace compared to the last few seasons, but that's just what we had to deal with here. But at number 6, the person that I feel is the least likely to win coming into the finale is still Genevie. And I feel like my view of Genevie didn't really change in this episode, where we're once again getting the storyline about how Genevie doesn't have any friends and that she's put up this wall around other people due to the Kashan vote. And again, I talked about this before, but I just don't see how they portray their winner in this way, as I feel like Jeff himself doesn't really endorse his view of the game. I feel like he very much sees the game of Survivor as his transformation and how you're supposed to learn something about yourself and to be authentic and to be human along the way. And I don't think the show will be presenting their winner as someone who is openly going against that theme. And I feel like even if Genevie were to grow out of this and to actually learn something about herself, it would just feel like a growth journey, and that the real reward is not winning, but learning that you don't have to have all these walls up around you. So I feel like either way, Genevie is screwed on that front. But I also think Genevie's screwed from a pure gain standpoint, where while she was just part of Operation Italy that pulled off this massive blindside, I feel like it doesn't really improve her position that much in the actual game, where they're coming into the final 6 at a 3-3 tie, and considering that Rachel has the block a vote that is only good up until the next tribal, she's more than likely going to use that and essentially ensure that Genevieve's side is going to be down numbers. And considering that Genevieve seems to be the bigger target between the people not in the majority right now, I feel like Genevieve's in a lot of danger coming to this next round if she doesn't win immunity. And I feel like considering that her edit doesn't really seem to be backing up a win, I just feel like Genevieve is screwed both from an edit standpoint, but also from a gain standpoint, where I just can't really see how she gets towards the end at this point. It's for that reason that I still have her here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we have another person who is remaining around the same spot as last week, but we do have Sue. It's actually impressive to me how under-edited Sue has been across this post-merge, considering she seemed to come into the season as this big character, and we did see her getting a pretty big edit during the pre-merge, but has just completely died in the post-merge, and I feel like this episode in particular was pretty bad for her, where despite Caroline talking quite a bit about their duo across this episode and talking about how Sue likes to get dirty and looking for idols, we actually don't really get that much from Sue in this episode, aside from her talking about how she's glad Kyle's gone, which is pretty funny there. She also talks about how she still has her idol and could use it to save Caroline, only to not do so, which is obviously not great. And I feel like this episode just further propelled this notion that she's probably not going to win, probably going to get dragged to the end and be a losing finalist. I feel like this episode didn't really do anything to change my view of Sue. And while you could say that this episode was shielding Sue from the Caroline blindside and her making this bad decision by not using the idol, I feel like at this point I'm just so confident that Sue's not winning that I just had to have her here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and we have another person who I'm pretty confident is not winning at this point, but we do have Sam. And Sam does technically get his way in this episode, where he does finally scratch his way out from the bottom and pull off this big move in Operation Italy, which is obviously decent for him surviving this round. However, as I talked about with Genevieve, I just don't think it's going to translate to him being in that great of a spot in the future, where considering that Rachel has the block of vote to use at the next round, it's probably going to lead to him losing one of his numbers, if not himself being the boo, which is obviously not great. But even beyond that, he does get plenty negativity from Tini, where Tini gets really indignant about him not picking them for the reward. And obviously it's pretty funny and all, but again, the fact that they go so far out of the way to show Tini just dunking on Sam is probably not a great look at the end of the day. And at this point, I'm probably more confident in other people to pull out the win compared to Sam. So I feel like for edgic reasons as well as gameplay reasons, I feel like I still have to have Sam relatively low here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we have yet another person who I'm pretty out on at this point, but someone has to be at the spot. But number 3, we do have Tini. And as I alluded to a moment ago, Tini gets quite a bit of focus in this episode, with them getting really upset at Sam following the reward. And while it's negative content for Sam and definitely lowers Sam's chances of winning, I also think it lowers Tini's chances of winning as well, as it makes him come off as pretty petty over the fact that they weren't picked for a reward so deep in the game when they're already in the majority alliance. So I don't think this was a great look for Tini this episode. Not to mention that they talk so openly about wanting Sam out, only for them to not get their way here, which is not great. So at this point, I'm not feeling that great about Tini. They're probably not winning. I feel so much more confident about a particular other person, and it's for that reason that Tini is here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and this person has gone up due to other people going down, but we do have Andy. And admittedly, I don't think Andy's winning. I feel like Andy only moved up because Tini had such an actively bad episode that I kind of had to move them down. Whereas I feel like Andy's episode here was mostly fine, as Andy does get the bulk of the credit for pulling together this move of taking out Caroline here. And obviously it's decent on paper, the fact that he's able to pull off this big plurality vote, the final 7. And we even see shots of the jury after this vote, where they talk about how they know that Andy's the one who flipped. And obviously that could garner him some respect if he were to get towards the end. However, at the end of the day, I just don't think Andy's winning. I feel like he's gotten such a big focus on him being this mastermind this season, and we've finally seen him pull off this big move, and now we have a reason to believe that Andy will be this final boss to be taken out before the end. But I feel like Andy's left such mixed signals across the season, with him having episodes like this where he is his mastermind. But you also have episodes like last week where he blatantly doesn't get his way, which is all pretty funny there. And I feel like with him having such a big visibility spike across the entire season, I just don't see how he goes on to win at this point. He'll probably be sniped out before the end if I had to guess. But I feel like for those reasons, I can't really have him in contention at this point. But again, someone has to be a number 2, and I feel like I have a very obvious number 1, so it's for that reason that Andy is here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Survivor 47 at this point is still Rachel, and I feel like it's not even close at this point. Now, it's kind of weird to say that considering that Rachel was technically blindsided in this episode, and even beyond that, you had there being talk about her being a target if she didn't win immunity, and also her not using her block a vote or idol at this round, which is obviously not great. But I feel like considering the context, I feel like Rachel's edit here was about as good as it could have been, where you have people talking early on about her being a threat, which obviously just leads to her winning immunity. But I think Rachel herself is pretty shielded from the edit across this episode, where while she had been getting some content across the last few episodes about wanting to take out Genevieve, only to her to not get her way there, I feel like this episode has her not doing that, where she doesn't say that she's going to vote Genevieve in this episode, where instead it's other people talking about the plans, only for them to not get their way there. So I feel like the fact that Rachel was shielded in this episode just reinforces to me that she's probably the winner of the season, and I feel like the fact that people are talking about her as this threat just adds credence to the fact that she probably is this jury threat and someone who probably will win a jury vote if she gets towards the end. And while there have been instances in the past where someone has been propped up as this threat only to be taken out before the very end, I think if we're looking at things from a pure gain standpoint, I think there is a clear path for Rachel to get towards the end, where she clearly is being set up to use her block of vote in the next episode to get her way at the final 6. She has an idol to use at the final 5, and at that point, she probably has a clear path towards the end at that point, where she'll probably win at that point. So I feel like from a pure game perspective, while she is being talked about as a big threat, I feel like at this point, there is such a low likelihood of her actually going home, considering the fact that she is loaded with advantages. I feel like there is a clear path for her to actually get towards the end, and I feel like with her having by far the best edit out of anyone left in the game at this point, I feel like she is by and away the frontrunner to win the game in my eyes, which is why she is still here at number 1. And there we go, that will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really help with the channel. Now, we are towards the end game at this point, so I'm actually going to be doing my jury scenarios video next, which is a bit early, but that's just what we have to do at this point. And then beyond that, I'm planning to do my player ranking and review after the season ends, so you can look forward to that. I'm on Patreon and have a YouTube membership, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. And you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.